You're welcome to the Policy Council. My name is Opeyemi Agbaje. In this special edition of the Policy Council, we focus on integrity, business integrity, personal integrity, and societal integrity, and the role it can play in transforming individuals, institutions, and society. We focus on the illustrious life of one Nigerian who at 82 years old continues to impact society and who has done so for the last 6 decades of his life. Enjoy the program. You're welcome back to the Policy Council. My guest today defies a straitjacket. He was a broadcaster. Indeed, he was a teacher before that. He was a company executive. He was an ambassador. He became head of a government parastatal. He was in academics. He chairs a university governing council. He's been a civil society activist of several varieties. And he's a role model to several generations of Nigerians. My guest is Dr. Christopher Kolade, CON. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Good to be here.
We're very privileged to have you here, sir. Many younger Nigerians will probably know you in relation to the ambassador to the UK, or maybe some associate you with the Lagos Business School.
Yeah.
But for us, when we were in primary school, you were a subject of our current affairs, who is the Director General of the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation. Yes. And that was under the military.
Yes, it was.
How was it running the media, the Broadcasting Corporation, during military rule?
Well, of course, running anything during military rule is a challenge because the whole culture of the military, their training, their upbringing, is one that says you give a command, somebody obeys. Now, communication and the whole business of social interaction, that's not something that responds to that kind of culture. So the challenge was to still make broadcasting useful to people who wanted to communicate while making sure that you could survive under a military dispensation. So it was a challenge.
It was a challenge. And there's this story I've read about in several contexts about the Dimka coup. Yes. And you're running into trouble with the soldiers. Tell us about that, sir.
Well, actually, I never see it as my running into trouble.
Okay.
Remember that the Dimka coup was not the first coup to happen.
Yes, sir.
In fact, we had become accustomed to coups. And it's important to remember that because no coup that became something
Public
you could
knowledge,
see ever failed, except that one. So that was something that dictated your attitude towards it. So when, on that morning, we began to notice movements along the Ikoyi Road, showing that people were in something of a panic, we knew that something was happening. And very soon, you see, Broadcasting House was always...
That's where the coup started.
Yes, it's always a target of coup makers. Why? Because radio was the instrument they used in announcing their presence and in trying to gain some kind of whether compliance, acceptability. So very soon, I was Director General, and I usually had my radio going just to listen to what was going on. And I noticed that we were playing military music. I thought, that's strange. Then someone looked into my office, one of my staff, and said, I think there's a coup.
Wow. Oh, you were already in the office?
I was already in the office. And I said, what do you mean you think there's a coup? He said, I can see movement. So I came out of my office to see what was going on. Then I said, military music, who authorized military music? The coup makers must have got here. So I was going down to the studio when someone said to me, better not go into that continuity studio because the soldiers are there. And you know, when soldiers are somewhere, if you make them nervous, they can do certain things. So I stayed out, but very soon I saw someone in military uniform accompanied by 4 people in what looked like civilian clothing, but they were all carrying guns. And so this man, the one leader, said, you are Christopher Kolade? I said, yes. He said, well, all right, we have just taken over the government. And for your information, we have just killed the head of state.
Wow.
So we want to make a broadcast. Now, when someone introduces
has killed
himself
the head of state,
as having killed the head of state, you know that you are, you know, I mean, he can kill you too. But I thought, you know, when people are in that situation, they're a bit nervous.
yes, sir.
When they're nervous, they can do anything. So my role was to try and calm things down so that nothing untoward would happen. So when he said, I want to make a broadcast, I said, fine. I said, about what? He said, I've taken over the government. I said, fine. Follow me to the studio. So I took him and these 4 people to the studio.
Was this Dimka, sir?
This was Dimka himself.
Okay.
Took them into the studio and said, so what do you want to do? You want to do it live or you want to record it? And he said he wanted to record it. Good. Here we go. And all the 4 soldiers accompanied him into the studio. So that was my first test. I said, are you sure you want these 4 people with you? Because if you start making your broadcast, any movement they make, any sound they make, will register on the air. So it's better for them to be outside. Now, those soldiers did not want to go outside. So he spoke to them in Hausa, and so they moved out. So here was Dimka and myself.
Alone with you.
And he brought out a script, which he had prepared, handwritten. And so he started making his recording. And when he got to the point of the curfew, he said there'll be a curfew from
dawn to dusk.
Dawn to dusk. And I thought, that's strange, but I'm not the coup maker, so what's the problem? So he made his recording. I brought him out of the studio, and I asked him, when do you want this to be broadcast? He said, do it every 15 minutes. Good. So he went away, and I said to my people, there you are, a coup has taken place. They say they've killed the head of state, so obviously they are the authority now. And at that point, I believed that this was another coup and the government had changed. But about an hour later, someone said to me, there are armored vehicles coming into the compound.
Wow.
I thought, what for? And true, there were about 8 armored vehicles with guns and turrets pointing towards our building. And so by this time, the soldiers had secured the gates to Broadcasting House. So I went down to the soldiers at the gate and said, look, why don't you open the gates? Let my staff go home. And you can remain in the place if you like. And the fellow who I discovered later was Major Rabu, said to me, what do you mean, go home? They're not going anywhere. So we all stayed in there. But soon, Dimka came back, said someone had told him that he got the dawn to dusk wrong, and he wanted to correct it. So I said, fine, we go back to the studio. So we went back to the studio. But just as we were about to enter the studio, now to enter the studio, you would turn a corner of the building and you could see Ikoyi Road from there. And as we turned that corner, there was a military lorry discharging soldiers who then went on the ready with guns pointing at the place. So when we saw that lorry, Dimka said, let me see what is happening. So I also turned towards the road to look at the road. And when I discovered it was soldiers coming down, I then turned round to say to Dimka,
do you still want to?
He was no longer there.
Wow.
He had faded away. So I was on my own now. So he never made that correction. And so what I did was to start going into each of the offices and saying to people, take cover because I can see soldiers about to attack the building. Well, that was it, really. The soldiers then...
Later we learned Babangida and Dinka.
It was Babangida who had brought in those armored vehicles. And apparently, unknown to me, he had actually had a discussion with Dimka along one of our corridors. I wasn't there. And then the armored vehicles withdrew. So something had happened.
A negotiation had taken place.
Yes. But the point is that, you know, it's only afterwards that you can really assess the gravity of what had happened. While it is happening, two thoughts were in my mind. One, I had staff in the compound, and they must be safe. And two, if this was a coup, better not do anything about it because it's a soldier-to-soldier thing, and we are just civilians.
And very easily, the invading soldiers could have, as military sometimes do, leveled...
The invading soldiers actually started shooting. They just shot at nothing, really. And we all had to take cover. But God was good because no member of my staff got hit by any bullet.
Did you hear later, sir, as I've read in history books, General Danjuma, who was army chief, queried Babangida and said, my instruction was for you to level the place.
Well, I heard that too, but I can only say that's hearsay.
Thank God he didn't obey the instruction.
If it was true that he gave that instruction, well, it was not obeyed. Because if it had been obeyed, then I would not be talking to you now.
Interesting. Let's take a short time out, and I'm having this excursion through the history of Nigeria and the illustrious career of Dr. Christopher Kolade. We'll be right back.
Who knows Abi better thing? Abi who no like better thing? All these fine things where they see so. Now money government they take do am now. Abi, I think it's like, you know, I mean, excuse me, I dey pay my tax. I dey do a thing, I dey pay my tax. Say you don't pay your own tax. If you pay your tax, I pay oh.
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
You're welcome back. It's still the Policy Council. I have a luminary of many categories, Dr. Christopher Kolade, on the Policy Council. So, sir, we were talking about this very exciting today, but very dangerous experience you had with the soldiers. And then I recall reading also that subsequently, when the coup failed, the new people thought you had collaborated with coup plotters.
Yes. The culture of the military, as I came to understand it, was that the patience to reason something out was not part of their culture. They thought there were straightforward answers to certain questions. So the argument was that if Dimka managed to get into Broadcasting House and take over the place, those in charge of Broadcasting House must have been complicit somehow. And so I had to go and write statements. And defend myself and so on. But I saw it as, if you like, part of the price you pay for being a leader in a situation like that. You cannot delegate leadership to anyone when the crisis happens. So you got to handle it yourself. So it was not a big thing for me.
There was never a risk that you were going to face the tribunal?
Well, I never thought there was a risk.
Okay.
There was an investigative panel.
Yes.
And I appeared before them twice. And I wrote my statement 3 times. So there was that. But at no point did I feel that I was really in any danger, because I was completely unaware of what was going on.
So beyond that coup, I mean, the Nigerian media is totally different today.
Yes.
Then the broadcasting house was critical to coup plotters because there were very few and they were owned by government.
In fact, we were the only federal broadcasting service at that time.
Okay.
So if you wanted to stage a coup in Nigeria,
you had to.
You had to look for us.
So so beyond that, the issue of running the media in that context, generating news, broadcasting daily, must have been a very serious challenge.
Well, you know, and it was a serious challenge, but it was a challenge that we were able to deal with, mainly because those who were doing broadcasting in those days, both the ones who were appearing in front of camera or microphone, and those who were managing, were professionals. They had been trained in what they were doing. So there was always a psychological advantage, if you like, that these people, the military or even the civil service, that were challenging you or doing anything, were coming at you from another platform, another platform, which was inferior to the one you were standing on. And so, in a situation like that, what I found was that the best policy is when they come at you with some idea or they wanted you to do something that was not proper, if you would immediately show them how doing it professionally would give them a better result, they would back away from you. Yeah. So I mean, if they said to us on one occasion, whenever the head of state is going to do a television broadcast or something, or radio broadcast, it is the Director General that must introduce him.
On air?
On air. And we managed to say to them, well, you know, what we think you want is that the best announcing voice should be the one to introduce the head of state. And guess what? Our Director General is not our best announcing voice. So we'll offer you our best announcing voice. And they accepted it.
Interesting. I've listened to you tell a story. Now, this is moving away from the military, but in terms of the management of the public sector.
Yes.
I've listened to you tell a story about how board meetings before you became Director General used to be 2-day or 3-day affairs, and then you managed, after you took over, to turn it into a half-day affair.
Well, what I have discovered over my career span is that people go to meetings and they never really wonder what they're getting out of the meeting. People come there and they talk and they even jest and so on, but what is a meeting for? And I was helped along the road by a boss of mine who was Director General before I became Director General. He was a New Zealander.
Okay.
And he came here and found that we had all these meetings. So he made up his mind that he wouldn't hold any meeting. So he just took decisions and said, do it this way and do it that way. Now, it was not the best way to do it, but it taught me a lesson.
Yeah.
Therefore, when I became Director General, what I did was to say, right, first of all, I am the one that will build up the agenda of the meeting. I'll consult the chairman, but I'm the one that will decide. For every issue on that agenda, we'll prepare a position paper. We'll make sure that that position paper gets to the members a week before the meeting. So the chairman would have the advantage, starting the meeting, to say, we have a position paper on item 1. I take it you've all read it because we got it a week ago. So, and the paper would say, these are the options, A, B, and C. We prefer B for the following reasons. So, already the paper is asking a question. Do you support B rather than A or C? And if they've had a week to look at this thing, And remember, we were the broadcasters, they were just board members. Most times they found that what we recommended was what should happen. And so there was hardly any discussion. And therefore, what they used to do in 2 days, we did in about 4 hours.
And everybody saved time,
And
government saved
and
money.
the chairman said to me, "How did you do that?" I said, "I didn't do anything." "Is there something that you want to discuss that you
That we have
haven't
not discussed?
And he said, "No." I said, "Well, good." So we'll continue to do it that way. So after that, we didn't do 2-day meetings anymore.
Interesting. Let's take another time out. I'm having this discussion with Dr. Christopher Kolade. He's been Director General of the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, and he's been much more than that, as you will soon find out. I'll be right back. You're welcome back. And now I'll talk about your living broadcasting, something that is also there, and then going to work in the private sector with Cadbury.
Yeah.
Initially as Director of Administration.
Yes.
And then you became CEO. How were you able to make that transition?
Well, you know, when I was in public service broadcasting, I never felt totally comfortable. Because one thing about public service is that it never really utilizes your true talents.
potential.
Your true talents. Because if you want to utilize your true talents, you have to have freedom, not just of expression, but also freedom of thinking and freedom of reasoning. And public service did not give you much of that. So I think that when I made up my mind I was going to leave public service, I decided no more public service. I now want to go into the private sector, where it was my belief that you actually took responsibility for what you did, and you rose or fell by your
Based on
performance. So that's what happened.
It wasn't predictable that after going in as Director in charge of administration, that you would become CEO.
Well, actually, when I was being interviewed by the group chairman of Cadbury Schweppes worldwide, he actually asked me the question. He said, "You are now Director General of Broadcasting and you want to come to us as Administration Director. Is that because you think that in a few years you'll become CEO?" And I said, "No, actually, I just want this change. And I believe that I have what it takes to do the job that you are interviewing me for. Whatever happens after that is not really something I want to predict." So 4 years down the road from that interview, I was made Deputy Managing Director and then CEO a year later.
Interesting. Okay, then you later became chairman, sir.
Yes. Well, I became admin director, then took charge of personnel the next year.
Okay.
And as I said, 3 years after that, I was called in and told, "We're making you Deputy Managing Director so that you can become Managing Director." So things
You
happened.
retired, became
Things happened.
chairman
Yes.
again.
Then I was Managing Director from 1984 to 1995.
11 years.
Yes, Managing Director, CEO for 11 years. And when I retired from that, I then became chairman for another 7 years.
I know, as you may not have known me then, but I was a relationship manager for Cadbury out of GTB.
Yeah, okay.
That period, working with a certain gentleman who became deputy governor, who was my branch manager,
Yes.
Femi Pedro. And we knew about your absolute reputation for integrity. Was it a choice you made? Because we know the context around that time. Yeah. We knew who other CEOs were. Why did you make a choice not to use that position to enrich yourself?
Well, you know, I wish I could tell you that I made a choice or whatever. It was just my way of life. From when I was quite young, much younger than that, I had always seen myself as just an ordinary person. And I mean, at a point I was education officer, then I was senior education officer, then I was controller, but each of those titles I had to drop when I moved on to the next thing. So it became clear to me that really the only constant thing about me was Christopher Kolade. And therefore, any other thing that was added on to me was for a purpose and for a time. And if I didn't warn myself not to get too used to it, I might be derailed. So that's one philosophy of life that I learned from my parents long ago. The other thing also was that I found out, even as a classroom teacher, that when you're teaching children in the classroom, that endeavor is not your endeavor. It belongs to those children, because they are the ones who must leave this classroom with something. You brought something there, hoping that they would leave with something that would improve their own life. So they're the owners of the agenda. You are simply a facilitator of something. Don't give yourself a more important role than you really have. And I find that if you follow that philosophy, when you then get an opportunity to enrich yourself or do something out of the ordinary, the Holy Spirit reminds you that you're going to return to ordinary at some point of your life. So you better not do anything outrageous now. And really, I find that it works for me.
Excellent. But if the public record is to be believed, some of your successors at Cadbury didn't live up to your very high standards. How does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel unhappy, but not unduly so. And I'll tell you why. Again, one of the things I've learned, because I have had multiple careers now, is that when you leave a position, or let me put it this way, when I have left a position, I've always found that there was something else for me to do. Now, if you're facing that direction, doing something new, you don't really have time or space to go back to where you were and wonder what's going on. So I've always moved on. But when you then find out that some of the things that you cherished while you were there have not been sustained, it makes you feel unhappy. But always remember, I always remember that people, just as I had to make my own way, people have to make their own way. And if by the grace of God I got it right, I hope the grace of God is always available to other people so they can get it right too.
Listen, philosophy, integrity, very many lessons to learn from Dr. Christopher Kolade.